In today's video, I want to talk about beyond the man-child label, understanding developmental maturity discrepancies in autism. Now, there's a phrase that gets thrown around in frustrated marriages all the time. He's basically a man-child. Okay, maybe he forgets responsibilities, shuts down emotionally, melts down under stress. Maybe his wife feels like she's parenting him instead of partnering with him. And eventually the label appears, man-child. But what if that label is deeply misleading? What if what looks like immaturity is actually something far more neurologically complex? Because in many autistic adults, there's a profound developmental asynchrony. One part of the brain may be operating at an exceptionally high level, intellectually, analytically, professionally, while another part is significantly delayed in emotional regulation, stress tolerance, executive functioning, or relational maturity. In other words, you can have a man who sounds brilliant in the boardroom, yet becomes emotionally overwhelmed by a difficult conversation at home. You can have someone capable of advanced engineering who still struggles to initiate basic household tasks consistently. You can have a husband who appears highly competent to the outside world, yet internally feels chronically flooded, confused, exhausted, and developmentally behind socially and emotionally. So, today, I'm going to peel back the man-child label and talk about what may actually be happening neurologically. Because once couples understand asynchronous development in autism, the entire conversation changes. Not into excuse making, not into avoiding accountability, but into clarity. And clarity changes everything. So, welcome back to the channel. I'm Mark Hutton, and on this channel we talk about autism, neurodiverse relationships, emotional intelligence, nervous system regulation, and the hidden dynamics that affect couples and families living with ASD. And today, we're talking about developmental maturity discrepancies in autistic adults. Because many neurotypical spouses are not actually dealing with narcissism, laziness, or intentional irresponsibility in the way that they think they are. They're often dealing with uneven neurological development, and that distinction matters enormously. Now, let's talk about the problem with the man-child label. The term man-child carries enormous shame. It implies selfishness, entitlement, refusal to grow, emotional laziness, and certainly some people genuinely avoid responsibility. I get that. That absolutely exists. But in many neurodiverse marriages, the situation is far more complicated than that. Because autism is not simply a social communication condition. It is fundamentally a developmental condition. And developmental conditions don't develop evenly. That's the key idea I want you to understand today. Development in autism is often asynchronous. Some systems mature rapidly, others mature slowly, and some remain vulnerable under stress indefinitely. And this creates a profound, confusing presentation. The autistic husband may appear extremely mature in one setting and surprisingly immature in another. Highly rational during work meetings, but emotionally dysregulated during conflict. Financially intelligent, but unable to organize daily life. Capable of encyclopedic knowledge, yet unable to tolerate relational ambiguity. Independent in some ways, deeply dependent in other ways. Now, to the neurotypical spouse, this inconsistency feels intentional. How can you be so competent there and so helpless here? That question becomes the breeding ground for resentment. But neurologically, these are often entirely different systems. Cognitive intelligence and emotional regulation are not the same thing. Analytical reasoning and executive functioning are not the same thing. Verbal intelligence and relational maturity are not the same thing. And autism often exposes those discrepancies in dramatic ways. Let's talk about the cognitive brilliance that can mask emotional delays. One of the most misunderstood realities about autism is that high intelligence can camouflage developmental struggles. The autistic person may have extraordinary strengths in pattern recognition, logic, memory, systematizing, technical learning, abstract reasoning. These strengths create an illusion of global maturity. People unconsciously assume, well, if he's this smart, he should also know how to manage emotions and manage relationships and manage stress and have empathy and take on daily household responsibilities. But neurological development doesn't work that way. A person can have graduate level intellectual abilities and still possess adolescence level emotional regulation under stress. That sounds harsh until you realize we see uneven development everywhere in autism. A child may read at a college level while struggling socially with peers. An autistic adult may excel professionally while collapsing from sensory overload at home. Your ASD husband may understand quantum physics while genuinely struggling to interpret emotional nuance during an argument. That's not stupidity. It's uneven neurological maturation. And when couples fail to understand this, they personalize this discrepancy. The neurotypical spouse often concludes, "You just don't care." But many autistic husbands are actually overwhelmed rather than uncaring. Those are not the same thing. And confusion between those two interpretations will destroy your marriage. Now let's talk about executive function deficits and why they look like immaturity. I want to talk about one of the biggest drivers behind the man-child perception: executive dysfunction. Executive functioning includes abilities like planning, task initiation, organization, prioritization, time management, impulse control, transitioning between tasks, working memory, self-monitoring. Now, when these systems are impaired, autistic adults can appear irresponsible or immature even when they genuinely want to succeed. And this creates painful relational dynamics. The neurotypical spouse understandably says, "Why can't you just do it?" Meanwhile, the autistic husband is internally experiencing something closer to neurological paralysis. Not because he lacks intelligence, not because he wants someone else to parent him, but because initiating, sequencing, organizing, and sustaining tasks can require enormous neurological effort. And here's where resentment escalates. The autistic partner may function relatively well at work because work environments often provide clear rules, predictable expectations, structured systems, external accountability, defined roles. But guess what? Home life is emotionally fluid. Marriage requires constant adaptation, unspoken expectations, emotional interpretation, rapid transitions, relational multitasking, ambiguous social cues. Those are precisely the environments where executive functioning vulnerabilities often become exposed. So the neurotypical wife sees, "You can function at work just fine." But neurologically, the two environments are radically different. Work operates through structure. Home operates through emotional complexity. There's where we got a problem. Because emotional complexity is often where autistic nervous systems fatigue fastest. Now let's talk about social exhaustion and emotional regression. Here's another dynamic people misunderstand. It's called social exhaustion. Many autistic adults spend enormous energy masking through the day. They monitor facial expressions, tone of voice, eye contact, social timing, conversational flow, professional expectations. By the time they get home, their nervous system is depleted, and exhausted nervous systems regress. That's true for everyone, by the way, not just people on the spectrum. But autistic nervous systems often regress more dramatically under chronic overload. This can create a shocking discrepancy between public competence and private collapse. Coworkers see the composed professional. The spouse sees shutdown, irritability, avoidance, emotional flooding, or childlike coping mechanisms. And again, the neurotypical spouse interprets this morally. "You give everyone else your best, and you give me your worst." But many autistic husbands are not strategically withholding maturity. They are neurologically depleted. Now, that does not mean that your ASD spouse's pain isn't real. It absolutely is real. Living with emotional inconsistency is exhausting. Carrying invisible labor is exhausting. Feeling emotionally alone is exhausting. But resentment increases when behavior is interpreted exclusively through a moral lens instead of a neurological lens. Now, clinical insight allows couples to move from accusation towards strategy. So let's talk about delayed emotional development and how it is not permanent failure. One of the most hopeful realities I've observed clinically is this: delayed development is not the same thing as impossible development. Many autistic adults continue emotionally maturing well beyond the timelines society expects. Why? Because development in autism is often non-linear. For most neurotypical individuals, skills are acquired intuitively during adolescence. But for people on the autism spectrum, those skills have to be consciously learned later in life through repetition, coaching, emotional mapping, nervous system regulation, and relational practice. That doesn't mean that growth can't happen. In fact, some autistic adults become extraordinarily emotionally intelligent over time precisely because they eventually study emotional systems intentionally. And they're really good at studying stuff. But shame blocks growth. And labels like manchild activate defensive collapse. The ASD nervous system here is you're defective, you're pathetic, you're failing as an adult. And shame never produces sustainable transformation. Understanding, however, creates psychological safety. And psychological safety allows learning. And learning allows maturation. This is why reframing matters so much. Not to eliminate accountability, no, but to make accountability neurologically accessible. That's a huge distinction. Now, let's talk about what neurotypical spouses need to understand. If you are the neurotypical wife watching this, I want to say something very carefully, but also compassionately. Your exhaustion matters. Your loneliness matters. Your resentment did not come from nowhere. Many neurotypical spouses have carried overwhelming emotional labor for years. And understanding autism does not mean suppressing your needs. No. But it may help you stop interpreting every developmental gap as intentional selfishness. Because many autistic husbands are living with chronic nervous system overload, emotional confusion, executive dysfunction, and profound shame simultaneously. And shame often makes people appear less mature, not more mature. The more flooded the autistic nervous system becomes, the more primitive coping mechanisms emerge. Avoidance, withdrawal, defensiveness, rigidity, shutdowns. These are frequently survival responses, not calculated cruelty. Again, that does not erase impact, but it changes intervention. Instead of saying, wish you would just grow up, the question becomes, what supports emotional regulation and executive function here? That's a far more clinically productive framework. Now let's talk about what autistic men need to understand. If you're the autistic husband listening to this, I need to say something equally important. Neurological explanations are not permission to remain passive. Understanding developmental discrepancies should increase self-awareness, not eliminate responsibility. Your NT wife is not your nervous system regulator. She's not your executive functioning coach. She's not your emotional manager. Part of adult maturity is learning how to compensate for neurological vulnerabilities intentionally. That may include therapy, executive functioning systems, visual reminders, sensory regulation practices, conflict scripts, emotional vocabulary development, structured routines, recovery periods after overload, relationship coaching. The goal here is not perfection, of course. The goal is increased stability, predictability, repair capacity, and emotional accountability. And many autistic men absolutely can grow in those areas with support and insight. But growth only begins when you stop seeing yourself as either all broken or all fine. Usually the truth is more nuanced than that. You may be highly capable in some developmental domains and significantly delayed in others. And that discrepancy is real. And once you acknowledge it honestly, meaningful growth becomes possible. Now, the phrase man-child oversimplifies something deeply neurological and deeply human. Autistic adults are not refusing to mature. They're navigating asynchronous development in a world that assumes all developmental systems should progress evenly. But autism never develops evenly. And when couples understand that, compassion becomes possible again. Not pity, not enabling, not avoidance of responsibility, but informed compassion. The kind that creates strategies instead of endless resentment. Because neurodiverse marriages improve when people stop fighting inaccurate explanations. Now, if this video resonated with you, let me know in the comments which part felt most accurate to your experience. And if you want more content on neurodiverse marriage, emotional regulation, executive functioning, Cassandra syndrome, and autism-related relationship dynamics, subscribe to the channel. And remember, understanding the nervous system changes the conversation. I'll see you next time. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you. Hey guys, this is Mark. Some of you may not know that I have a lot of books on Amazon. So if you like my videos, you'll like my books. I have several for ASD spouses, for NT spouses, and for the neurodiverse couple. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this link. Feel free to click on that link and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that applies to you. So if you're struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, help is available, one click away.